Staff Sergeant Maria Santos stepped off the C-130 transport at forward, operating Base Falcon with her weathered combat pack and a determination that had carried her through 8 years of military service. The Afghan dust swirled around her boots as she surveyed the fortified compound nestled in the harsh mountains of Helmand Province. This was it, her final chance to prove she belonged in combat operations, not behind a desk processing supply requisitions. The other soldiers moved with the confident swagger of seasoned infantry, their plate carriers loaded with ammunition and their rifles carried with the casual familiarity of warriors who'd seen real action. Maria watched them joke about their upcoming patrol rotations, each one eager to get outside the wire and engage the enemy. Her own weapon, an M4 carbine she'd maintained religiously for years, felt suddenly inadequate compared to the specialized gear her male counterparts carried. While they discussed their combat experiences from previous deployments, Maria remained silent, knowing that her background in logistics and supply chains wouldn't earn her any respect in this environment. "Look what the supply depot sent us," muttered Corporal Jake Morrison, a cocky soldier from Georgia whose voice carried across the staging area. His comment drew chuckles from the assembled infantry squad as they sized up the new arrival. "Hey, supply, you sure you're not looking for the admin building? It's about 200 meters that way." The nickname stuck immediately, supply. By the time she'd dropped her gear at the temporary quarters, even some of the NCOs were using it with barely concealed amusement. Maria had fought for this assignment for over 2 years, consistently scoring in the top percentile on marksmanship qualifications and physical fitness tests. Her request for combat arms transfer had been denied repeatedly, with commanders citing unit cohesion concerns and optimal placement in critical support roles. But exceptional performance on advanced weapons training and tactical exercises had finally earned her this chance, a temporary attachment to Bravo Company for what was officially termed Combat Readiness Evaluation. The briefing that first evening made the stakes crystal clear. Captain Rodriguez, the company commander, barely acknowledged her presence as he outlined their mission parameters. "Our EO covers 12 square kilometers of hostile territory," he announced, pointing to the tactical map. "Taliban activity has increased significantly in recent weeks, and intelligence suggests they're planning coordinated attacks on coalition forces. Every soldier in this unit needs to be ready for direct engagement at any moment." Maria studied the terrain features and known enemy positions with the intensity of someone whose entire career hung in the balance. While others took notes on patrol routes and radio frequencies, she absorbed every detail about sightlines, elevation changes, and potential ambush sites. Her background in supply logistics had taught her to think systematically about resource allocation and risk management, skills that translated surprisingly well to tactical planning. The weapons inspection that followed revealed the gap between her equipment and everyone else's. Master Sergeant Williams, the grizzled platoon sergeant, lifted her standard issue M4 with the kind of skeptical expression reserved for questionable decisions by higher headquarters. "This thing seen any action outside the qualification range?" he asked, examining the rifle that Maria had meticulously maintained according to technical manual specifications. The question earned more laughter from the watching soldiers, who'd customized their weapons with advanced optics, grips, and accessories that spoke to extensive combat experience. "Yes, Sergeant. Maintained it myself for 3 deployments in support roles," Maria replied, her voice steady despite the mounting pressure she felt from being constantly evaluated and found wanting. Williams raised an eyebrow at her response, noting that most soldiers her age had barely completed 1 deployment, let alone 3. But her time had been spent managing supply convoys and coordinating logistics operations, valuable work, but not the kind that impressed infantry soldiers who measured worth by trigger time and enemy contact. The real test came during the unit's standard combat proficiency evaluation, designed to assess each soldier's readiness for the dangerous patrols that define daily life at FOB Falcon. The course simulated a typical patrol scenario, with pop-up targets representing enemy combatants appearing at various distances and angles. Soldiers had to navigate through the course while engaging threats quickly and accurately, all while communicating with their squad and maintaining tactical movement. Maria watched the first few soldiers complete the course with impressive times, their movements fluid and aggressive as they engaged targets with rapid, controlled bursts. Morrison finished with the best time, his rifle chattering as he put multiple rounds into each target zone. The watching soldiers cheered his performance, and even Captain Rodriguez nodded approvingly at the display of speed and aggression that characterized successful infantry soldiers. When Maria's turn came, she approached the course with a different methodology entirely. Instead of the rapid engagement style favored by her peers, she moved deliberately through each position, taking time to properly identify targets and ensure clean shots. Her rifle fired single, precise rounds rather than the burst fire preferred by the others. Each shot found its mark with surgical accuracy, but her methodical approach consumed precious seconds that the evaluation criteria weighted heavily. The timer showed her final result: accurate hits on every target, but a completion time that exceeded the standard by nearly 30%. Captain Rodriguez consulted his evaluation sheet with a frown that telegraphed his decision before he spoke. "Santos, outstanding marksmanship, but your engagement speed doesn't meet infantry standards. Combat situations require immediate response to threats." The disappointment in the command tent was palpable as Rodriguez delivered his assessment. "Based on this evaluation, I'm recommending you return to your previous assignment in logistics support. Your skills are valuable, but not in a direct combat role." The rejection felt like a physical blow to Maria, who had sacrificed years of career advancement opportunities for this single chance to prove herself as a combat soldier. That evening, she found a transfer order waiting on her bunk, effective. Immediately, she was being reassigned to the base logistics center to manage supply distribution and inventory control. No appeal process, no second chance. Just a clinical dismissal based on arbitrary time standards that valued speed over precision. As she packed her gear, Maria could hear Morrison and his friends discussing their upcoming patrol schedule, their voices carrying the confidence of soldiers who belonged in the fight she was being excluded from. Maria Santos reported to the logistics center the next morning, carrying her rifle and the weight of another shattered dream. The logistics center at FOB Falcon operated 24 hours a day, managing the flow of ammunition, food, medical supplies, and equipment that kept the forward operating base functional. Maria found herself assigned to Sergeant First Class David Chun, a career logistics specialist who had been managing supply operations in combat zones for over 15 years. Unlike the infantry soldiers who had dismissed her, Chun evaluated people based on competence and reliability rather than combat credentials. "Santos, your file shows exceptional organizational skills and attention to detail," Chun said as he showed her the computerized inventory system. "That evaluation from Bravo Company mentioned your methodical approach like it was a weakness. In logistics, being methodical keeps people alive." The supply depot covered nearly 2 acres of the base, with warehouses containing everything from rifle ammunition to vehicle parts, all requiring precise tracking and distribution. Maria's new responsibilities included coordinating supply runs to the various outposts scattered throughout their area of operations. Each convoy required careful planning, calculating fuel requirements, ammunition loads, food rations, and medical supplies based on the size and mission duration of each remote position. She quickly discovered that her systematic approach to problem-solving translated perfectly to logistics management, where overlooking a single detail could leave soldiers without critical supplies during firefights. The revelation came during Her first week when she began analyzing the supply request patterns from different outposts. While processing routine ammunition resupply orders, Maria noticed discrepancies that troubled her. Several forward positions were requesting significantly more ammunition than their reported engagement levels should require. The numbers didn't match the after-action reports she cross-referenced from the intelligence section. Outpost Thunder, positioned in a supposedly quiet sector, had requested 3 times the normal ammunition allocation over the past month. Their patrol reports indicated minimal enemy contact, yet they were burning through rifle and machine gun ammunition at rates consistent with heavy combat operations. Maria pulled similar data from 4 other positions and found the same pattern: excessive ammunition consumption with limited documented enemy engagement. Her concerns deepened when she discovered maintenance records showing unusual weapon malfunctions from the same outposts. Multiple rifles and machine guns were being reported as damaged or destroyed, requiring immediate replacement. The frequency of equipment failures seemed statistically impossible unless the weapons were being subjected to extreme conditions or improper use. Maria began documenting everything, creating detailed spreadsheets that tracked ammunition expenditure, equipment failures, and reported combat activity. Chen noticed her intense focus on the data analysis and encouraged her investigation. "Good logistics people ask questions when the numbers don't add up," he told her. "In my experience, soldiers don't waste ammunition unless something serious is happening that's not making it into official reports." Maria's background had taught her that patterns in supply consumption often revealed operational realities that commanders preferred to keep quiet. The breakthrough came when she correlated her supply data with medical evacuation reports from the same time periods. The outposts showing excessive ammunition use also had significantly higher rates of minor injuries, cuts, bruises, and stress-related medical complaints that suggested soldiers were operating under extreme pressure. The pattern painted a picture of units engaged in far more intense combat than their official reports indicated. Maria compiled her findings into a comprehensive analysis that she titled Supply Consumption Patterns and Operational Tempo Discrepancies. The report detailed how supply requests could reveal actual combat intensity more accurately than after-action reports, which were often sanitized for political or operational security reasons. Her data suggested that several outposts were facing sustained enemy pressure while reporting minimal contact. When she attempted to share her analysis with Captain Rodriguez, his response was swift and dismissive. "Santos, your job is to fill supply requests, not analyze operational patterns. These consumption rates reflect training exercises and equipment maintenance, nothing more." His tone made it clear that further investigation was unwelcome, but Maria had spent enough time around military bureaucracy to recognize the signs of information being suppressed. Sergeant Shun was more supportive, but equally cautious about challenging official narratives. "Maria, you've identified something important, but company commanders don't like logistics people questioning their reporting. Be careful how you pursue this." Despite the warnings, Maria continued her analysis, driven by the growing conviction that soldiers in the field were facing dangers that weren't being acknowledged by higher headquarters. Her investigation expanded to include communication logs, which revealed another disturbing pattern. Radio traffic from the high-consumption outposts showed frequent requests for immediate resupply that were being denied or delayed. Units were being told that their allocation requests exceeded normal parameters and would require additional justification. Meanwhile, those same units were clearly engaged in combat operations that required immediate ammunition resupply. The most troubling discovery came when Maria accessed classified intelligence summaries that Chun's security clearance allowed her to review. Enemy activity reports showed significant Taliban movement in the sectors where her data indicated heavy ammunition consumption. The intelligence painted a picture of coordinated enemy operations, designed to probe coalition defenses and identify weak points. Yet the official narrative from unit commanders minimized the threat, leveled to maintain the appearance of operational success. Maria realized that her methodical approach to data analysis had uncovered a systematic problem with military reporting. Units were understating enemy contact to avoid appearing ineffective, while simultaneously burning through ammunition and equipment at unsustainable rates. The disconnect between official reports and actual combat intensity was putting soldiers at risk by preventing adequate resource allocation. Her nightly routine became consumed with updating her analysis, cross-referencing new supply requests with casualty reports, equipment failures, and intelligence summaries. The pattern grew stronger each day. Outposts facing intense pressure were being forced to operate with inadequate supplies because their commanders couldn't officially acknowledge the threat level without admitting that previous assessments had been wrong. 3 weeks into her logistics assignment, Maria had documented clear evidence that multiple outposts were facing combat situations that exceeded their reported parameters. Her supply data revealed operational realities that challenged the official narrative of successful pacification efforts. The question was whether anyone would listen to a soldier who had already been deemed unsuitable for combat operations. The answer would come sooner than she expected, in a crisis that would test everything she had learned about the gap between official reports and battlefield reality. The moment Maria had been dreading arrived on a scorching Tuesday morning when Colonel Patricia Hayes, the brigade commander, conducted her quarterly inspection of FOB Falcon. The visit was designed to evaluate operational readiness and assess the effectiveness of recent tactical changes implemented across the region. Maria watched from the logistics center as the convoy of vehicles rolled through the main gate, carrying staff officers, intelligence analysts, and a small media team documenting the military's progress in Afghanistan. Colonel Hayes had built her reputation on aggressive tactics and decisive leadership, earning rapid promotions through successful combat commands in Iraq and Afghanistan. Her inspection would focus on combat effectiveness metrics, casualty reduction rates, and evidence of improved security in the surrounding area. The timing couldn't have been worse for Maria's growing concerns about supply discrepancies and unreported combat intensity. Captain Rodriguez had prepared extensively for the inspection, ensuring that all official reports painted a picture of steady progress and effective enemy suppression. During the morning briefing, he presented statistics showing decreased enemy contact, improved patrol success rates, and enhanced cooperation from local Afghan forces. The data supported the narrative that current tactics were successfully reducing Taliban influence in their area of operations. Maria sat in the back of the briefing room, having been included as part of the logistics support staff. She listened to Rodriguez describe ammunition consumption as consistent with training exercises and routine security patrols, knowing that her data told a completely different story. The disconnect between his presentation and her supply analysis was staggering, but she remained silent, understanding that challenging a company commander during a brigade inspection would end her military career instantly. The inspection continued with a tour of base facilities, during which Colonel Hayes praised the efficiency of supply operations and the apparent calm in the surrounding area. Maria found herself directly questioned about inventory management and supply distribution effectiveness. Sergeant Santos, are our forward positions receiving adequate ammunition and equipment to maintain operational readiness? The colonel asked, her sharp eyes studying Maria's response carefully. The question hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Maria felt the weight of every data point she had collected, every discrepancy she had documented, every pattern that revealed the true intensity of combat operations. Captain Rodriguez stood nearby, his expression making it clear that only one answer would be acceptable. Yes, ma'am. All supply requests are being fulfilled according to standard allocation procedures, Maria replied. the words tasting like betrayal. Even as she spoke them, Colonel Hayes nodded approvingly and moved on to inspect the ammunition storage facilities. Maria accompanied the tour group, watching as Rodriguez explained their efficient distribution system and highlighted the low consumption rates that supposedly indicated minimal enemy contact. The lies felt suffocating, but Maria understood that speaking up would accomplish nothing except destroying her own career while changing nothing about the situation. The inspection's climax came when Colonel Hayes announced her intention to visit Outpost Thunder, one of the positions that Maria's analysis had identified as facing intense but unreported enemy pressure. "I want to personally observe operations at our most successful forward position," the colonel declared, apparently unaware that Thunder's success was largely fictional, maintained through falsified reporting and inadequate supply allocation. Rodriguez's face went pale at the announcement, but he couldn't refuse a direct order from his brigade commander. The visit was scheduled for the following morning, giving him less than 18 hours to coordinate with Outpost Thunder's commander and ensure that their version of events matched his official reports. Maria watched him frantically making radio calls, his stress level indicating that he knew the visit could expose serious problems. That evening, Maria made a decision that would define the rest of her military career. She prepared a detailed briefing packet containing her supply analysis, correlation data, and evidence of the reporting discrepancies she had discovered. The packet included charts showing actual ammunition consumption versus reported enemy contact, equipment failure rates that indicated sustained combat operations, and medical evacuation patterns that contradicted official casualty reports. Her plan was simple but dangerous. She would request a private meeting with Colonel Hayes and present her findings, regardless of the consequences. The evidence was too compelling to ignore, and the upcoming visit to Outpost Thunder would likely expose the truth anyway. If she remained silent and soldiers were killed because of inadequate supplies or false intelligence assessments, she would never forgive herself. The opportunity came during the evening meal when Colonel Hayes visited the dining facility to interact with enlisted personnel. Maria approached her table during a quiet moment, saluted respectfully, and requested permission to discuss operational concerns. The colonel's staff officers looked annoyed at the interruption, but Hayes gestured for Maria to continue. "Ma'am, I've identified significant discrepancies between reported combat activity and actual supply consumption patterns at several forward positions," Maria began, her voice steady despite her racing heartbeat. "The data suggests that our outposts are facing much higher enemy pressure than official reports indicate." She handed the colonel her briefing packet, watching as Hayes's expression shifted from polite interest to serious concern. Colonel Hayes quickly scanned the documents, her experienced eye immediately recognizing the implications of Maria's analysis. The correlation between ammunition consumption and medical evacuations was particularly damning, suggesting sustained combat operations that weren't being accurately reported through official channels. "Sergeant Santos, how long have you been tracking this data?" she asked, her voice taking on the sharp tone of a commander who had just discovered a serious problem. 3 weeks, ma'am. I initially noticed the discrepancies while processing routine supply requests, but the pattern became clear when I cross-referenced the data with other operational reports. Maria replied, aware that Captain Rodriguez had noticed their conversation and was approaching the table. With obvious alarm, the confrontation that followed was swift and brutal. Rodriguez immediately attempted to discredit Maria's analysis, describing her as a failed infantry candidate who was overstepping her authority by questioning operational reporting. Colonel Sergeant Santos was reassigned to logistics after failing combat readiness evaluation. Her interpretation of supply data is uninformed speculation, he declared, his tone suggesting that Maria's concerns were the product of resentment rather than legitimate analysis. Colonel Hayes studied both officers carefully, her expression Unreadable. The dining facility had grown quiet as other personnel sensed the tension at the command table. Captain Rodriguez, these supply patterns are quite clear. Are you suggesting that Sergeant Santos has fabricated this data? She asked, her voice carrying the dangerous calm of a senior officer who suspected she was being misled. The silence that followed stretched like a wire under tension, with Maria's military future hanging in the balance alongside the truth about combat operations that were being systematically misreported. The aftermath of Maria's confrontation with Colonel Hayes was immediate and devastating. Within hours of the dining facility incident, she found herself summoned to Captain Rodriguez's office, where his fury was barely contained behind military protocol. The small room felt suffocating as he paced behind his desk, occasionally stopping to glare at her with unconcealed anger. "Santos, you've made a serious mistake," he began, his voice low and threatening. "Questioning operational reporting to a brigade commander is insubordination, and your analysis is based on incomplete understanding of complex tactical situations." Rodriguez explained that her supply data analysis had been reviewed by his staff and found to be fundamentally flawed. According to his interpretation, the high ammunition consumption rates reflected intensive training exercises designed to prepare soldiers for potential future operations. The equipment failures were attributed to harsh environmental conditions rather than combat damage, and the medical evacuations primarily involved routine injuries and illnesses rather than combat-related casualties. "Your background in logistics doesn't qualify you to interpret operational data," Rodriguez continued, his tone growing more condescending with each word. "You've embarrassed this unit and undermined months of successful operations with amateur analysis that completely misses the tactical picture." The captain's explanation sounded rehearsed, as if he had been preparing his defense since the moment Colonel Hayes first examined Maria's briefing packet. The punishment was swift and comprehensive. Maria was immediately removed from her logistics, analysis duties and reassigned to basic inventory management, the military equivalent of clerical busywork. Her security clearance was suspended pending a review of her inappropriate access to classified operational data, effectively cutting her off from the information sources that had enabled her investigation. Master Sergeant Chun was ordered to restrict her access to supply consumption data and ensure that her duties focused solely on routine administrative tasks. "I'm sorry, Maria," Chun said privately after receiving his orders. "Your analysis was solid, but challenging the command structure always carries consequences. Rodriguez has made it clear that any further investigation of supply patterns will result in disciplinary action for both of us." The warning was delivered with genuine sympathy, but the message was unmistakable. Her career would be destroyed if she continued pursuing the discrepancies she had discovered. Maria's new duties involved managing basic supply inventories, conducting routine equipment inspections, and processing standard requisition forms. The work was mind-numbing and deliberately designed to keep her away from any data that might enable further analysis of operational patterns. She spent her days counting ammunition boxes, cataloging medical supplies, and ensuring that routine paperwork was filed correctly, all while knowing that soldiers at forward outposts were potentially facing dangers that weren't being adequately addressed. The isolation was complete and carefully orchestrated. Other logistics personnel began avoiding her, having received clear signals that association with the troublemaker who had challenged Captain Rodriguez would harm their own careers. Morrison and his infantry friends made sure everyone knew that Supply had attempted to undermine operational security with her amateur hour intelligence analysis, further cementing her reputation as someone who couldn't be trusted with sensitive information. But Maria's exile to administrative obscurity provided an unexpected advantage: access to historical supply records that nobody considered sensitive enough to restrict. While processing routine paperwork, She discovered archive files containing supply data from the previous 6 months, before the current operational period began. The historical records painted a disturbing picture that confirmed her worst suspicions. About the systematic nature of the reporting problems, the pattern extended far beyond the current discrepancies she had identified. Previous outpost commanders had also reported minimal enemy contact, while consuming ammunition at rates consistent with sustained combat operations. Equipment failure rates had been consistently high across multiple rotations, suggesting that harsh combat conditions were being routinely underreported to maintain the appearance of operational success. Most troubling was evidence that her concerns had been raised before by other personnel who had noticed similar discrepancies. A previous logistics specialist had documented ammunition consumption patterns that closely matched Maria's analysis, but his report had been buried in administrative files with no apparent action taken. 2 different medical personnel had noted unusual injury patterns that suggested more combat activity than official reports indicated, but their observations had been dismissed as speculation. Maria realized that she had stumbled onto a systematic problem that extended far beyond Captain Rodriguez or even FOB Falcon. The pressure to report operational success was creating incentives for commanders to minimize enemy contact in official reports while privately dealing with much higher threat levels. The disconnect was putting soldiers at risk by preventing adequate resource allocation and realistic threat assessments. Her investigation expanded to include maintenance records for vehicles and communications equipment, areas where her administrative access remained unrestricted. The data revealed additional evidence of combat intensity that contradicted official reporting. Vehicle damage rates suggested frequent enemy contact, with repair records indicating bullet holes, explosion damage, and mechanical failures consistent with combat operations rather than routine patrols. Working late into the evening, Maria began compiling a comprehensive analysis that documented the systematic nature of the reporting discrepancies. She used only historical data and publicly available information, carefully avoiding any access that could be construed as exceeding her authority. The evidence was overwhelming. Multiple outposts across different time periods had demonstrated the same pattern of underreported enemy contact, combined with high supply consumption and equipment damage. The most damaging discovery came when she found casualty reports that had been reclassified from combat-related to training accidents or equipment failures. Soldiers who had been wounded during enemy contact were being reported as victims of accidental injuries, allowing commanders to maintain lower combat casualty statistics while the wounded personnel still required medical treatment and evacuation. Chun noticed her after-hours research and approached her with obvious concern. "Maria, whatever you're working on, be very careful. Rodriguez has made it clear that any further questioning of operational data will result in immediate disciplinary action. He's looking for any excuse to bring formal charges against you." The warning was delivered with genuine care, but Maria understood that she was completely on her own if she continued her investigation. 3 weeks into her administrative exile, Maria had assembled evidence of systematic misreporting that extended across multiple units and time periods. The documentation was irrefutable, but she also understood that presenting it would end her military career and potentially result in criminal charges for exceeding her authority. The question was whether the truth was worth the certain destruction of her future in the military. The answer would come when the very outpost she had been tracking would face a crisis that exposed the deadly consequences of prioritizing political reporting over battlefield reality. Maria's decision to continue her investigation, despite the warnings, came during a sleepless night when she realized that staying silent made her complicit in a system that was endangering soldiers' lives. The weight of her discovery pressed against her conscience like a physical burden. She had documented evidence that multiple outposts were facing combat situations that exceeded their official parameters, Yet those same positions were being denied adequate supplies because commanders couldn't acknowledge the threat level without admitting their previous assessments were wrong. The next morning, she made contact with Sergeant First Class Jennifer Walsh, a combat medic who had recently returned from a rotation at Outpost Thunder. Walsh had been processing through the medical facility for what was officially classified as a training injury, but Maria suspected there was more to the story. During a carefully casual conversation in the base exchange, Maria learned that Walsh's training accident had actually occurred during a sustained firefight that lasted over 4 hours. The official report called it a patrol exercise gone wrong. Walsh confided, glancing around to ensure they weren't being overheard. But we were pinned down by coordinated enemy fire from multiple positions. We burned through our entire ammunition load and had to call for emergency resupply twice. When we requested additional ammunition allocation for the following week, we were told our consumption rates exceeded normal parameters and needed justification. Walsh's account confirmed Maria's worst fears about the gap between battlefield reality and official reporting. The medic described outposts that were essentially under siege, with daily enemy contact that was being systematically minimized in after-action reports. The pressure comes from above, Walsh explained. Company commanders are being evaluated on their ability to maintain stability and reduce enemy activity. Reporting sustained combat makes them look ineffective. Armed with Walsh's first-hand testimony, Maria made the difficult decision to approach Colonel Hayes directly, bypassing the chain of command that had already demonstrated its hostility to her concerns. The risk was enormous, violating military protocol by going around her immediate superiors could result in court-martial proceedings. But the alternative was allowing soldiers to continue operating with inadequate supplies while facing threats that weren't being officially acknowledged. The opportunity came during Colonel Hayes's extended visit to review the brigade's operational effectiveness. Maria requested a meeting through the colonel's aide, submitting a formal written request that outlined her concerns about critical supply allocation discrepancies affecting forward position readiness. The clinical language was carefully chosen to focus on logistics rather than operational reporting, giving the colonel plausible justification for granting the meeting. Colonel Hayes agreed to see her during a brief window between scheduled briefings, and Maria prepared meticulously for what she knew would be her only chance to present her case. She compiled her most compelling evidence into a concise briefing that focused on supply consumption patterns and their implications for soldier safety. The presentation avoided direct accusations of falsified reporting, instead allowing the data to speak for itself about the disconnect between official assessments and actual operational requirements. The meeting took place in a secure conference room where Maria spread her charts and analysis across the table, like evidence in a court proceeding. Colonel Hayes listened intently as Maria walked through her findings, occasionally asking pointed questions about data sources and analytical methodology. The colonel's military experience was evident in her ability to quickly grasp the implications of supply consumption patterns and their correlation with unreported combat activity. Sergeant Santos, these numbers are extremely concerning, Colonel Hayes said after reviewing the complete presentation. If your analysis is correct, we have multiple outposts facing sustained enemy pressure while being denied adequate resupply because their commanders can't officially acknowledge the threat level. The colonel's tone indicated that she understood both the military implications and the political pressures that were creating the reporting problems. Maria presented Walsh's testimony as corroborating evidence, explaining how first-hand accounts from returning personnel confirmed the supply data analysis. Ma'am, the medics and soldiers rotating back from these positions consistently describe combat intensity that doesn't match official reports. The supply consumption patterns simply document what's already happening in the field, she explained, careful to present her findings as supporting evidence rather than accusations. Colonel Hayes studied the documentation for several minutes, her expression growing increasingly grim as she absorbed the full scope of the problem. Sergeant Santos, you realize that presenting this analysis directly to me represents a serious breach of protocol. Captain Rodriguez should have been given the opportunity to address these concerns through proper channels, she said, though her tone suggested understanding rather than condemnation. Yes, ma'am, I understand the protocol violations, Maria replied. But my previous attempts to raise these concerns were dismissed, and I believe soldier safety takes precedence over administrative procedures. The statement was carefully worded to acknowledge her breach of protocol while emphasizing the moral imperative that drove her decision. The colonel's response surprised Maria with its directness and support. Your analysis appears thorough and your concerns are legitimate. I'm ordering an immediate review of supply allocation procedures and operational reporting accuracy across all forward positions in this brigade. You'll be temporarily reassigned to my staff to assist with this investigation. The reassignment was both a protection and a promotion, removing Maria from Rodriguez's authority while giving her access to the resources needed to expand her analysis. Captain Rodriguez's reaction to Colonel Hayes's intervention was predictably hostile. When informed of Maria's reassignment and the brigade-level investigation, he requested a private meeting with the colonel to discuss what he termed inappropriate elevation of logistics concerns that fall within company-level authority. The meeting lasted over an hour, with Rodriguez attempting to minimize the significance of Maria's findings while defending his unit's reporting accuracy. The investigation that followed would expose the full extent of the systematic problems Maria had identified, but it would also create powerful enemies who viewed her analysis as a threat to their careers and reputations. The next phase of her ordeal would test not just her analytical skills, but her courage in the face of institutional pressure to conform and stay silent. The real crisis was still approaching, and when it arrived, Maria's documentation of unreported combat intensity would prove to be not just academically interesting, but literally a matter of life and death for soldiers who depended on accurate intelligence and adequate supplies. The crisis that would validate Maria's months of analysis began at 0347 hours on a moonless Thursday morning when Outpost Thunder came under coordinated attack from a Taliban force that intelligence assessments had claimed didn't exist in the area. The assault was precisely the kind of sustained, multi-directional engagement that Maria's supply data had predicted, but which official reports had consistently denied was occurring. Radio communications crackled across FOB Falcon's command center as desperate calls for immediate ammunition resupply and medical evacuation filled the airwaves. Maria was working the night shift in the brigade logistics center when the first distress calls arrived. Her temporary assignment to Colonel Hayes's staff had given her access to real-time communications from all forward positions, and she immediately recognized the voice of Lieutenant Sarah Martinez from Outpost Thunder, requesting emergency ammunition resupply. The urgency in Martinez's voice contradicted months of official reports, describing the outpost sector as experiencing minimal enemy activity. Thunder Main, this is Thunder 6. Martinez's transmission cut through the static. We are under heavy enemy fire from multiple positions. We have sustained casualties and are critically low on ammunition. Request immediate resupply and medical evacuation. The situation report that followed painted a picture of coordinated enemy assault, involving mortar, rocket-propelled grenades, and sustained small arms fire from elevated positions surrounding the outpost. The response from FOB Falcon's Operations Center revealed the deadly consequences of months of false reporting. Captain Rodriguez, monitoring communications from the main command post, initially questioned the severity of the situation. Thunder 6, confirm enemy strength and engagement level. Your sector has been assessed as low threat with minimal enemy presence, he transmitted. Apparently unable to reconcile the emergency calls with his unit's official reports, Martinez's reply carried the frustration of a soldier whose warnings had been consistently ignored. Thunder Main, we have been reporting increased enemy activity for weeks through proper channels. We are currently engaged with an estimated 40 to 50 enemy fighters in prepared positions. We need ammunition and medical evacuation immediately. The transmission was punctuated by the sound of explosions and automatic weapons fire that could be heard clearly through the radio. Maria, Colonel Hayes arrived in the command center, her face grim as she absorbed the tactical situation developing at Outpost Thunder. The colonel immediately began coordinating response assets, but the preparations revealed how unprepared the brigade was for sustained combat operations that had been officially assessed as unlikely. Ammunition supplies earmarked for Thunder had been redistributed based on the low threat assessment, and medical evacuation assets were positioned to support other areas deemed higher priority. The ammunition shortage became critical within the first hour of the engagement. Thunder's defenders had exhausted their basic load during the initial assault and were requesting immediate resupply of rifle ammunition, machine gun rounds, and grenades. The logistics system, designed around official threat assessments that minimized enemy capability, couldn't rapidly redistribute resources to support an engagement that supposedly wasn't happening. Maria found herself thrust into the center of the crisis when Colonel Hayes ordered her to coordinate emergency ammunition resupply using her detailed knowledge of consumption patterns and outpost requirements. Santos, your analysis predicted exactly this scenario. Use that knowledge to ensure Thunder gets what they need, the colonel commanded, her voice carrying the urgency of a commander who had realized that academic reports had suddenly become life-and-death decisions. Working frantically at her computer terminal, Maria pulled up the supply allocation data she had been compiling for months. Her analysis showed that Thunder had been requesting ammunition levels consistent with sustained combat operations, but those requests had been denied based on official threat assessments that contradicted the actual enemy activity. She quickly calculated the outpost's immediate needs based on their reported engagement level and began coordinating with aviation assets for emergency resupply. The complexity of the situation became apparent when Maria tried to locate adequate ammunition stocks within reasonable helicopter range of Thunder's position. The systematic underallocation of resources based on false reporting had created shortages across multiple supply points. Ammunition that should have been positioned for rapid distribution had been centralized at distant locations, assuming that forward outposts wouldn't face sustained combat operations. Colonel Hayes monitored the resupply coordination while simultaneously trying to organize additional support for Thunder's desperate situation. The brigade's quick reaction force was already committed to another operation, and available helicopter assets were limited by weather conditions and enemy anti-aircraft activity that intelligence reports had failed to predict. Santos, how long to get ammunition to Thunder? She asked, her voice reflecting the pressure of soldiers under fire who were counting on immediate support. Maria's calculation was sobering. Ma'am, given current ammunition locations and helicopter availability, we're looking at 90 minutes minimum for the first resupply run. That assumes we can launch immediately and encounter no enemy fire en route. The timeline was far longer than Thunder's critical situation could accommodate, highlighting how months of inadequate planning based on false assessments had created a potentially fatal delay. The situation deteriorated rapidly as Thunder reported increasing casualties and dwindling ammunition supplies. Lieutenant Martinez's transmissions became increasingly desperate as her soldiers faced the possibility of being overrun by an enemy force that official intelligence had claimed didn't exist in strength sufficient to mount coordinated attacks. Thunder Main, we are down to less than 30 rounds per soldier. We cannot sustain this engagement much longer without immediate resupply. Maria realized that conventional resupply timelines wouldn't save Thunder's defenders. The outpost needed immediate support, and the only assets available were helicopter crews who have to fly into a hot landing zone under heavy enemy fire. The mission would require precise coordination and split-second timing to deliver ammunition before Thunder's defenders were overwhelmed by an enemy that had never officially existed. As she coordinated the desperate resupply mission, Maria understood that her months of analysis had led to this moment where accurate intelligence and adequate preparation would determine whether Thunder's soldiers survived the night. The systematic problems she had identified were no longer academic concerns, but immediate threats to soldiers who were fighting for their lives against an enemy that official reports had consistently underestimated. The helicopter carrying emergency ammunition lifted off into the darkness, beginning a race against time that would test everything Maria had learned about the deadly gap between political reporting and battlefield reality. The UH-60 Black Hawk helicopter lifted off from FOB Falcon at 0523 hours, carrying emergency ammunition, supplies, and a crew that understood they were flying into one of the most dangerous missions of their deployment. Maria found herself aboard the aircraft not as a passenger, but as the brigade's expert on Outpost Thunder's tactical situation and supply requirements. Colonel Hayes had made the unprecedented decision to include her on the mission, recognizing that her detailed analysis of the outpost's operational patterns made her the most qualified person to assess their immediate needs. Chief Warrant Officer David Kim, the helicopter's pilot, briefed the crew as they flew through the pre-dawn darkness toward Thunder's position. Intelligence reports minimal enemy anti-aircraft capability, but given how wrong intel has been about this sector, we're assuming heavy ground fire and possible RPG threats, he announced over the intercom. The flight path took them through mountainous terrain that provided some cover from ground-based weapons, but the final approach to Thunder would require flying directly over known enemy positions. Maria monitored radio communications from Thunder throughout the flight, listening as Lieutenant Martinez provided increasingly desperate situation reports. The outpost's ammunition situation had become critical, with some defensive positions already reduced to less than 10 rounds per soldier. Enemy fire was intensifying rather than diminishing, suggesting that the Taliban force was confident in their ability to overrun the position before coalition reinforcements could arrive. Thunder 6, this is Dustoff 77. Kim transmitted as they approached the landing zone. We have emergency resupply inbound, but we need you to suppress enemy fire on the north side of your perimeter. We'll be coming in fast and low. The coordination required precise timing, with Thunder's defenders concentrating their remaining ammunition to create a brief window for the helicopter to land and unload supplies. The final approach to Thunder revealed the full intensity of the battle that official reports had been minimizing for months. Tracer rounds streaked across the landscape like deadly fireworks, and the distinctive sound of RPG explosions echoed through the helicopter's cabin. Maria could see muzzle flashes from multiple enemy positions surrounding the outpost, confirming her analysis that Taliban forces had been building strength in the area while intelligence assessments continued to report minimal enemy presence. As the Black Hawk descended toward Thunder's landing zone, enemy fire shifted to target the incoming aircraft. Bullets struck the helicopter's armored hull with metallic impacts that sounded like deadly hail, and Kim fought to maintain control as he maneuvered through the gauntlet of ground fire. Taking fire from multiple positions, he reported over the radio. This is definitely not a low-threat environment. The landing was controlled chaos, with the helicopter touching down just long enough for Maria and the crew chief to throw ammunition crates onto the ground before lifting off again. In those 30 seconds, Maria got her first direct view of Outpost Thunder's defenders, and what she saw confirmed every concern she had raised about inadequate supply allocation. Soldiers were sharing ammunition between fighting positions. Medical supplies were clearly insufficient for the number of casualties, and defensive positions showed damage from sustained enemy fire that contradicted months of official reports. Lieutenant Martinez appeared at the landing zone during the resupply, her uniform torn and her face streaked with dust and smoke. "Thank God you made it," she shouted over the helicopter's rotor noise. "We've been trying to report the real situation here for weeks, but nobody would listen." Her words carried the frustration of a commander whose accurate assessments had been consistently ignored in favor of politically convenient fiction. Maria handed Martinez a detailed manifest of the ammunition they had delivered, along with additional supplies that would be arriving on subsequent flights. "Lieutenant, this resupply should give you enough ammunition for sustained defense, but we need accurate real-time reports on enemy positions for the next delivery," she explained, her logistics expertise finally being applied to immediate tactical needs rather than academic analysis. The helicopter's departure from Thunder provided Maria with a comprehensive view of the enemy positions that had been systematically ignored by intelligence assessments. She counted muzzle flashes from at least 12 different locations, indicating a coordinated attack by a significant Taliban force that had clearly been planning this operation for weeks. The enemy had established overwatch positions, prepared fighting positions, and coordinated fields of fire that demonstrated sophisticated tactical planning. As they flew back toward FOB Falcon, Maria compiled a detailed tactical assessment based on her first-hand observation of the engagement. The enemy force was significantly larger and better organized than any intelligence report had suggested, confirming that her supply consumption analysis had been detecting the signs of sustained enemy preparation that official channels had failed to recognize. The Taliban had been probing Thunder's defenses for months, building detailed intelligence about coalition capabilities, while remaining effectively invisible to official threat assessments. Colonel Hayes was waiting in the command center when Maria returned, eager for her assessment of Thunder's situation and enemy capabilities. "What did you see out there, Santos?" she asked, her tone indicating that she understood Maria's analysis would be more accurate than any official intelligence report. The question represented a complete reversal from the months when Maria's concerns had been dismissed as overreach by an unqualified logistics specialist. Maria's briefing painted a sobering picture of coordinated enemy action that had been months in preparation. "Ma'am, the Taliban force attacking Thunder appears to be at least company strength, well-equipped and operating from prepared positions. This wasn't a spontaneous attack. It's the culmination of sustained enemy reconnaissance and planning that our intelligence assessments completely missed." Her report included detailed observations of enemy tactics, weapons capabilities, and coordination that contradicted every official assessment of the area. The tactical implications were staggering. If Thunder represented the Taliban's actual capability in the region, then multiple other outposts were potentially facing similar threats that hadn't been officially recognized. Maria's supply consumption analysis had detected the signs of enemy activity that traditional intelligence gathering had missed, suggesting that logistics data might be more accurate than human intelligence reports in assessing actual threat levels. Colonel Hayes absorbed Maria's assessment with the grim understanding of a commander who had just discovered that her brigade was operating under fundamentally flawed assumptions about enemy capabilities. "Santos, your months of analysis predicted exactly this scenario. We need to immediately reassess threat levels at all forward positions based on your supply consumption methodology," she ordered, officially validating the approach that had been dismissed as amateur speculation just weeks earlier. The radio crackled with another transmission from Thunder, but this time Lieutenant Martinez's voice carried confidence rather than desperation. "Thunder Main, enemy assault has been repelled. We have adequate ammunition and are requesting medical evacuation for wounded. Thank you for the emergency resupply. It saved our position." The successful defense represented vindication, not just for Maria's analysis, but for the principle that accurate intelligence and adequate preparation were essential for soldier survival. As additional helicopter missions delivered supplies to Thunder throughout the morning, Maria coordinated resupply operations using the detailed consumption patterns she had been tracking for months. Her systematic approach to logistics had evolved from academic analysis to operational necessity, proving that methodical preparation and precise calculation were often more valuable than rapid response. Based on incomplete information, the defense of Outpost Thunder marked a turning point in how the brigade approached intelligence assessment and resource allocation, but it also established Maria as the soldier whose unconventional methods had saved lives when conventional approaches failed. The woman who had been dismissed as too slow and too methodical had proven that sometimes being right was more important than being fast, especially when lives hung in the balance. The aftermath of Outpost Thunder's successful defense created seismic changes throughout the brigade that extended far beyond simple tactical adjustments. Within 48 hours of the engagement, Colonel Hayes had ordered a complete restructuring of intelligence assessment procedures, supply allocation, protocols, and operational reporting standards. Maria found herself at the center of these transformations, no longer the dismissed logistics specialist who had been relegated to inventory management, but the architect of a revolutionary approach to military intelligence and resource planning. The first major change came in the form of the Supply Pattern Analysis Initiative, officially designated as SPAI, which institutionalized Maria's methodology for detecting enemy activity through logistics consumption patterns. Every forward operating base and outpost in the brigade would now be required to submit detailed supply usage reports that would be analyzed for discrepancies between official threat assessments and actual operational tempo. Maria was appointed as the program's chief analyst, with authority to question operational reporting and recommend resource reallocation based on her findings. Rodriguez faced immediate consequences for his systematic misrepresentation of operational conditions. The investigation that followed Thunder's defense revealed months of falsified reports, minimized casualty figures, and deliberate suppression of accurate intelligence about enemy capabilities. His relief from command was swift and comprehensive, with charges pending for endangering his soldiers through inadequate resource allocation and false reporting. The man who had dismissed Maria as an unqualified amateur found his own military career destroyed by the very patterns she had been documenting. Lieutenant Martinez was promoted to captain and given command of Thunder's sector, with explicit authority to report actual combat conditions without concern for political implications. Her first official report after the engagement detailed months of sustained enemy contact that had been systematically underreported, providing official validation for everything Maria's analysis had indicated. Sergeant Santos identified enemy activity patterns that our traditional intelligence methods completely missed, Martinez wrote in her assessment. Her supply consumption analysis proved more accurate than human intelligence reports. The transformation extended beyond individual personnel changes to fundamental shifts in how the brigade approached military operations. Maria's methodology was expanded into a comprehensive intelligence framework that correlated supply usage, maintenance records, medical evacuations, and communication patterns to create accurate assessments of actual threat levels. The new system, designated Integrated Logistics Intelligence Analysis, became a model for military units throughout Afghanistan and eventually influenced Pentagon policy for global operations. Master Sergeant Chun was promoted to Sergeant Major and given responsibility for implementing the new logistics intelligence procedures across the entire brigade. His long-standing support for Maria's unconventional approaches was finally vindicated, and he became one of the most vocal advocates for empowering non-traditional intelligence sources. Maria taught us that the best intelligence often comes From people who are closest to the actual operations, he explained during a briefing to visiting Pentagon officials. Traditional intelligence focuses on enemy intentions, but logistics data reveals enemy capabilities. The impact of Maria's work reached far beyond FOB Falcon when her analysis was featured in a comprehensive Pentagon study of intelligence failures in Afghanistan. The study, titled Logistics-Based Threat Assessment, Lessons from Forward Operating Base Falcon, became required reading at military staff colleges and intelligence schools. Maria's methods were incorporated into training curricula, ensuring that future military leaders would understand the intelligence value of supply consumption patterns and maintenance data. Tyler Morrison, who had initially mocked Maria as supply, requested a meeting with her several weeks after Thunder's defense. His swagger had been replaced by genuine humility as he acknowledged how wrong he had been about her capabilities. "Sergeant Santos, I owe you an apology that goes way beyond words," he said during their conversation. "Your analysis saved lives, including potentially mine if I had been assigned to Thunder. I learned something important about judging people based on their methods rather than their results." The vindication extended to Maria's original concerns about the infantry training that had led to her initial reassignment. Colonel Hayes ordered a review of combat readiness evaluation procedures, questioning whether speed-focused assessments actually measured soldiers' effectiveness in real combat situations. Maria's methodical approach, which had been deemed too slow for infantry operations, was recognized as exactly the kind of analytical thinking that prevented military disasters. General Patricia Morrison, the same officer who had visited FOB Falcon during the original inspection, returned to observe the transformed operations and interview Maria about her revolutionary approach to military intelligence. "Sergeant Santos, your work represents a fundamental shift in how we understand the relationship between logistics and intelligence," the general commented during their meeting. "You've proven that systematic analysis can be more valuable than traditional combat credentials." The personal transformation was equally significant for Maria, who had evolved from a supply specialist seeking combat validation to a recognized expert whose unique perspective had redefined military intelligence methodology. Her worn notebook, once mocked as the obsessive documentation of someone who couldn't adapt to military standards, had become the foundation for training materials used throughout the military. The detailed wind charts and consumption patterns that others had dismissed as excessive preparation were now studied as examples of the analytical rigor required for effective military operations. Maria's new position as Chief Intelligence Analyst for Logistics Pattern Recognition came with authority that extended throughout the brigade and consulting responsibilities for other military units facing similar challenges. Her office walls were covered with charts and maps showing supply consumption patterns from dozens of forward positions, each one telling a story about actual operational conditions that traditional intelligence had missed. Young intelligence analysts sought her mentorship, eager to learn the methodology that had revolutionized threat assessment. The most meaningful recognition came from the soldiers at Outpost Thunder, who credited Maria's analysis with providing the ammunition and supplies that saved their lives during the coordinated Taliban assault. Lieutenant Martinez presented her with a unit coin that had been specially engraved with the inscription, "Precision Saves Lives, Thunder 6. The gesture represented acknowledgement from combat veterans that her methodical approach was not a weakness but a strength that had prevented tragedy. The woman who had been dismissed as too slow, too methodical, and insufficiently aggressive had fundamentally changed how the military approached intelligence, analysis, and resource allocation. Her insistence on systematic documentation and pattern recognition had evolved from personal obsession to institutional standard, proving that sometimes the most important military innovations come from unexpected sources. Maria Santos stood in her new office reviewing supply consumption data from forward positions across Afghanistan. knowing that her analysis would help prevent other outposts from facing the same desperate situation that had nearly overwhelmed Thunder. The methodology that had been born from frustration and rejection had become a life-saving tool that honored both precision and speed, but never confused one for the other. Her transformation from failed infantry candidate to revolutionary intelligence analyst represented more than personal vindication. It demonstrated that the courage to challenge established thinking, even at great personal cost, could literally save lives when conventional approaches proved inadequate. The woman they had tried to sideline had ended up transforming an entire system of military thinking, proving that sometimes the most valuable soldiers are those who refuse to accept that existing methods are sufficient. When lives hang in they balance. 5 years later, Maria Santos stood before a packed auditorium at the Pentagon, wearing the silver bars of a first lieutenant and holding the distinguished service medal she had received for revolutionizing military intelligence methodology. Her presentation to senior military leadership from around the world was titled, "When Data Speaks Louder Than Doctrine, Lessons in Analytical Courage." The audience included generals, intelligence directors, and defense officials who had come to learn about the supply pattern analysis initiative that had spread throughout NATO forces. Her methodology had prevented 17 confirmed attacks across multiple theaters, saving hundreds of lives through early detection of enemy activity that traditional intelligence had missed. The most dangerous assumption in military operations, Maria told the assembled officers, is that unconventional thinking represents weakness rather than strength. Sometimes the person everyone overlooks is exactly the person everyone needs. Her words carried the weight of experience earned through years of proving that methodical analysis could be more valuable than rapid assumptions. In the front row sat Colonel Hayes, now a general who had become one of Maria's strongest advocates for promoting analytical thinking throughout military leadership. Beside her was Captain Martinez, whose successful command of Thunder Sector had been built on the intelligence principles Maria had pioneered. Even Tyler Morrison was present, now a staff sergeant who regularly credited Maria's influence with teaching him that patience and precision were combat virtues rather than weaknesses. Maria's final slide showed a simple message that had become the unofficial motto of modern military intelligence: speed without accuracy is just expensive noise. Precision with purpose saves lives. The presentation concluded with thunderous applause from officers who understood that military innovation often came from unexpected sources and unconventional perspectives. After the ceremony, Maria returned to her new assignment at the Pentagon, where she continued developing intelligence methodologies that honored both rapid response and careful analysis. Her worn notebook, now displayed in a frame on her office wall, served as a reminder that sometimes the most important victories begin with someone willing to document the truth, regardless of whether anyone wants to hear it. What did you think of Maria's incredible journey from dismissed supply specialist to Pentagon intelligence innovator? Her story proves that persistence and analytical courage can overcome any obstacle. If this story inspired you, hit that subscribe button and join our community of everyday heroes who refuse to give up on their dreams. What challenges are you facing that might need Maria's kind of methodical determination? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world.